I never thought much of it when I stumbled onto that section of Etsy. I had been browsing for an antique book on spirituality, something aesthetic to fill out my bookshelf. The initial search seemed harmless enough. Leather-bound books, old tarot decks, a few enchanted items, and other stuff you'd expect from the mystical corners of the internet. But then I started seeing some other listings, the kind that weren't just for show. One particular shop caught my eye. It was called Dark Dealings. Strange name, but it had 5 stars. The profile image was a black rose, and the tagline read, "Things you thought couldn't be real." Their items were labeled things like candle for guidance, potion for renewal, but the real kicker was a pact for the dark path. Out of curiosity, I clicked on it, and the description wasn't the vague nonsense most shops had. It claimed to be a guaranteed way to summon power beyond your control, and a service that ensures the delivery of your desires. It sounded like a joke. I figured it was just someone capitalizing on the dark academia vibe. There were no reviews on the listing, just comments from people asking if it worked. The shop's owner never replied, which only made it feel more legit. I knew it was stupid, but I started scrolling through the shop's listings, lingering on each one a bit longer. Potion for fortune, curse on enemies, charm for protection. They were absurd, yet something about them drew me in. By the time I realized how long I'd been on the page, it was 2 in the morning. Then, almost by reflex, I clicked Add to Cart on the Pact for the Dark Path. My hand hovered over Buy Now, and that's when I hesitated. I knew it was just nonsense, but part of me was unsettled. My mind was flooded with all these thoughts. What if it wasn't a joke? I shook it off, closed the browser, and went to bed. The next day, I told myself it was all harmless, just browsing. But over the next few nights, I found myself back on that same shop page. I don't know why, but I kept rereading that pack listing, going over the words in my head until I could practically recite them. Finally, in the early hours of a sleepless night, I decided, why not? I placed the order. For a few days, I didn't hear anything, which was honestly a relief. I figured they'd just ghosted me and kept my $30. But on the 3rd day, I received an email with the subject line, "Your Pact order has shipped." The sender's name was just Dark Dealings, no actual name. When I clicked to view the order details, it simply read, "Item is being prepared for you. No tracking number, no estimated delivery." Just that line. The package arrived 2 days later. It was plain brown with no return address. I carefully cut it open, half expecting to find a Halloween prop. But inside was a black velvet pouch and a folded note. I opened the note first. The handwriting was jagged, almost rushed, as if the writer was in a hurry. When curiosity meets action, a doorway opens. Light the candle at midnight. Set your intention clearly. Once lit, there is no undoing. I took the pouch and emptied it onto my bed. A small black candle rolled out, along with a vial of dark powder and another note that simply read, "Only you can choose to proceed." I was intrigued and terrified, but I decided to go along with it, feeling a strange pull that urged me forward. That night, as the clock approached midnight, I turned off all the lights in my apartment. I placed the candle in the center of my coffee table, sprinkled a pinch of the powder around it, and lit it. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, just as I was about to blow it out, the flame turned an eerie green. My hands felt clammy, and a chill ran down my spine. I sat back, watching, but nothing else happened. I was disappointed, but I couldn't deny that something about the flame's color unsettled me. I snuffed it out and went to bed, convincing myself it was a strange but ultimately harmless experiment. But the following night, I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. My apartment felt different, colder somehow. I glanced at my phone, and as I set it down, I caught sight of the candle on my coffee table. It was lit again. I knew I had blown it out. My heart pounded as I walked over, my mind racing with excuses. Maybe I dreamed putting it out. Maybe there was a draft. Then I noticed something new. Next to the candle was a small black feather. I couldn't explain it, but somehow, I knew it hadn't been there before. I took it as a sign that it was time to end this whole thing. I grabbed the candle, threw it in the trash, and buried the feather in my garden that morning. For a few days, everything felt normal again. I didn't think much about the candle or the note or any of it. But then I started noticing other things, small, unsettling details that were easy to ignore but added up over time. Lights would flicker at odd hours. The air would feel dense and heavy in certain corners of the apartment. And I'd hear faint whispers in the dead of night that I convinced myself were just the wind. One night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard what sounded like faint scratching coming from the living room. My stomach dropped. I wanted to ignore it, but the noise grew louder and more persistent, like something, or someone, was trying to claw its way in. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone as a flashlight, and crept into the living room. The scratching stopped, but I noticed something even more disturbing. On the coffee table, where the candle had once been, lay another black feather. This time, I panicked. I gathered all the strange items from the package, the notes, the velvet pouch, and the feather, and threw them in a dumpster down the street. I was done with this nonsense. But that night, I had the most vivid, terrifying dream I'd ever experienced. I was back in my apartment, but everything was dark, shadowed. I walked into the living room, and there, seated on my couch, was a figure cloaked in black. I couldn't make out its face, but it turned to look at me, and the air around me grew icy. In the dream, I asked, "Who are you?" The figure didn't speak, but I heard its voice in my head, deep and reverberating. "You summoned me." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, like the dream had somehow left a residue in the real world. I turned on every light in my apartment, sat on my bed, and waited for morning. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Every little sound felt sinister. Every shadow seemed to follow me. Then, just as I thought I was losing my mind, I received another package. There was no return address, and when I opened it, I found a single note inside. "Curiosity has a price." My hands shook as I held the note. I wanted to believe this was just someone messing with me, but something deep down told me it was real. I frantically searched for dark dealings on Etsy, hoping to leave a message demanding they stop. But the shop had vanished. It was like it had never existed. There was no record of the purchase, no order history, nothing. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself that this was just an elaborate prank, but I knew better. My life had changed, and I could feel the presence growing stronger. Every night the scratching returned, and every night I'd find another black feather waiting for me, as if it was a calling card. By the end, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up each night, waiting for the scratching to start, waiting for the figure from my dream to reappear. One night, as I sat in the living room, clutching a flashlight and listening to the now familiar scratching, the room grew cold, colder than I'd ever felt before. A chill ran down my spine as the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, and in that silence, I heard a voice, low and mocking. "Curiosity always finds its way back." I froze. I couldn't breathe. I could feel the presence hovering nearby, watching me with a cold, calculated patience. My only thought was to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Eventually, the silence lifted, and the air warmed up again. I could move, but I knew it wasn't over. Whatever I'd called into my life that night had decided to stay. I moved out of the apartment not long after, hoping that leaving the place behind would mean leaving the presence behind too. But every now and then, I find black feathers in the oddest places. Inside my bag, in my car, once even on my pillow. I haven't slept a full night since.